she was always inside me, but the hook was Verna. Verna had been the school secretary, and she decamped to work for the Renaissance Fair, and I took her job. And she looked at me and she said, Nishama, I've always wanted to be a witch at the Renaissance Fair, but I have to be an administrator. You be the witch. And I said, what? And she said, you know, you are a witch. So I guess I was. But I had to find out more. And first thing I needed was something to wear. So I went to the thrift shop and there was this kind of tattered silk black dress. That was right. But it needed something else. And that's how I found myself at the feather merchant. And I got these two black ostrich plumes and I made a little harness because this witch was going to have wings. And then I knew I was going to be in a tree. This witch should be green. So I got some green stuff for my face, my hands, my ankles. I would be green all over. But what was I going to do with people other than kind of hanging out witchily? Well, I had to get stuff together. And for grown-ups, spells, they like spells. So I got my supplies. I'll tell you what I did with them. And for kids, well, I had a couple of apothecary jars. You know, they're very serious looking. And I filled them with green water. I'll tell you what I did with them. But in the third, for some mysterious reason, I put a whole bunch of rice noodles in green colored water, and I'll tell you what I did with them. So now I had stuff, and I had to take it to the fair. And what would I transport it in? Well, we had this old camp drunk, and we lived with a guy, this was back in the early 70s, who was a gluer. He loved to pour resin on anything and stick things all over it. And so I poured resin on that trunk. Oh, the fumes, they made your head spin. And I stuck all kinds of things on it, like eucalyptus seed pods and eucalyptus dried leaves and moss and uh, shards of mirror. And by the time I finished, it was a very witchy looking trunk. So I packed my trunk and I went to meet my tree. Oh man, what an oak tree, glorious, right on the edge of the trail with a branch that I could kind of lounge on. Luckily, the crotch was low enough so that I could climb onto that branch. I'm not good at heights. So this is the way it went. I would be kind of lounging witchily on the branch, and people would be staggering down the trail. It was usually very hot, and they had been drinking mead, and they were chomping on turkey legs, and they were kind of out of it, but they'd look up and they'd say, is that a witch? And I say, yes, I am. And then I look at the grown-ups and I say, would you like a spell? And they said, yes. So I come down and I drape them with a net, kind of translucent black net. And if there were two of them, they loved it under the net. And I give them a couple of stones, smooth stones or shells to hold. And I say, hold these and wish for something and who knows what might happen. And then I would circle them with incense, tinkling a little bell, getting to all their senses. And when I whipped off the net when it was over, they usually looked very pleased. Now, when the kids came, I said, you want to meet my pets? And they said, yes. And I showed them, I took the top off the apothecary jar. There was just enough room for a little hand to slip in. I said, you can feel them, but don't take them out. They might bite. And they did not take them out. And then in the third jar, I'd say, would you like a magic noodle? And I pluck out this kind of green wiggly thing. It really looked alive. And they'd hold out their hand. And I say, no, I have to give it to you in a special place. So I kind of put it in their, collar or their cuff or their belt or their sock. And they went away very pleased. And the witching was going so well until the guy showed up. There's always a guy, and he was really in his cups. And he looked up at me and he said, you're not a real witch. Now, by then I knew, as Verna had foretold, that I was a real witch, but it was like a punch in the gut. And the only thing I could do was turn to my tree, which is, of course, the source of magic. And I held on to that tree. I clutched that tree. I buried my green face in the bark of that tree until I could center myself again. And then I made sure there were no tear tracks in my green face. And I went back and witched all through the rest of that magical summer. Now, you think it was all over, but she's inside there. And perhaps 15 years after this had happened, I was walking down the street of a small city near where I live, and a big guy, stopped me on the street, and he looked at me. By then I had this short hair, not that long, witchy hair, and I was old, etc. But he said, "Were you the Green Witch at the Renaissance Fair?" And I said, "Yes, I was." And he said, "You gave me a green noodle, and I was so scared I peed in my pants." The Green Witch is still here.